Seattle in early spring had a particular stillness to it, a quiet rhythm that felt like the city itself was still thawing from winter. Rain didn't fall in torrents, but in a soft mist that clung to car windows, rooftops, and eyelashes. Inside the modest two-story house in the Green Lake neighborhood, everything was quiet, warm, and ordered. The rain pattered gently against the windows as if respecting the silence within. Jake, a 37-year-old software engineer, had built his life around this peaceful routine. The house reflected that minimalist but lived in with clean. Counters, soft blankets folded just so on the couch, and shelves filled with books and vintage cameras he collected on the weekends. He and Kate had moved in together 2 years ago, though they'd been dating for 4. The house had become a blend of both their worlds, his digital precision and her editorial charm. Kate worked from home as a senior editor for a lifestyle magazine, and her presence was everywhere. Coffee mugs with funny sayings, candles that always smelled faintly of sandalwood, and her plants, which she nurtured obsessively and which he frequently forgot to water. Their home was calm, practical, intimate. The type of place where you took your shoes off at the door and didn't feel like you were missing anything by staying in on a Friday night. Weekdays followed a gentle rhythm. Mornings were quiet. Kate usually started her day earlier, making tea while Jake brewed his strong black coffee. They worked in separate corners of the house, Jake in the small office upstairs, filled with monitors and cables, and Kate at the dining room table, her laptop surrounded by sticky notes and manuscripts. There were no arguments, no raised voices, no slammed doors. They spoke in glances and touches, often more than they did in words. Evenings were slower takeout or one of Kate's pasta dishes, a shared bottle of wine, something streaming on the TV. Life wasn't exciting, but it was safe, predictable, comfortable, or so Jake thought. The new security system had been Jake's project, installed over a quiet weekend in January when a neighbor mentioned a few break-ins happening on the other side of the neighborhood. He'd researched the best smart home setups, mounted small discrete cameras at the front door, back patio, and hallway, synced them all to his phone. Not out of fear, really just out of habit. He liked systems. He liked knowing that everything had its place and could be accounted for. Kate had laughed, called him paranoid but cute, and had quickly forgotten about the whole setup after the first week. Now, in March, the cameras had become just another part of the house, blinking silently, capturing clips of Amazon deliveries, squirrels triggering motion alerts, and the occasional lost cat skittering across the porch. Jake checked the app once in a while, mostly when bored or testing the notifications. It had never caught anything important, just daily life played back in silent fragments. On that particular Wednesday, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Kate had mentioned earlier that she'd be heading over to Jenny's place that evening. Something about catching up over tea and a new book one of them had just read. Jake didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He trusted her. He'd never had a reason not to. She'd taken a shower in the late afternoon, blow-dried her hair while humming an old Fleetwood Mac song, and spent 10 minutes picking between 2 pairs of earrings. She looked casual, pretty, and perfectly relaxed. Just another quiet evening. In the life they had built together, Jake stayed behind, his laptop open. No, he wasn't doing much work. Rain drizzled outside, and he sat at the kitchen table, absent-mindedly watching the way the light moved across the floor. The warm glow of the overhead lights contrasted softly with the cool gray outside, creating the kind of ambiance you only noticed when you had nowhere to be. A candle burned in the corner. It smelled like bergamot and mint, Kate's favorite. He smiled to himself, thinking how much of her had soaked into this place. The framed photos, the textures of the cushions, even the playlist humming quietly. In the background, all of it was her, and he was grateful for it. The hallway console table had been newly arranged the day before. Kate liked to redecorate small corners of the house every few weeks, nothing big, just enough to keep things feeling fresh. There was a new vase, an old hardcover resting beside it, and a tiny bowl where they kept spare keys and coins. Jake passed it often without thinking, but tonight it caught his attention for no particular reason. Maybe it was the symmetry. Or maybe it was the sense that something, for just a second, felt too perfect. Outside, the wind picked up slightly. A car passed by slowly, tires hissing on the wet asphalt. Somewhere a dog barked twice, then silence again. Jake glanced at the time, 6:59 p.m. He opened his phone to respond to an email and, out of instinct, tapped into the security app. He scrolled past a few clips. A UPS delivery at noon, a neighborhood kid running across the lawn. Nothing new. By all appearances, it was just another calm evening in the house they called theirs. Jake had no way of knowing that in just a few minutes, everything he thought he knew about this space, this life, and this woman would shift quietly, surgically, and with irreversible precision. The house remained quiet after Kate left. The front door clicked softly behind her, and Jake heard the subtle shuffle of her shoes as she slipped them on by the door. Then nothing, just the fading sound of the street as her car pulled away. He sat back in his chair, took another sip of now lukewarm tea, and let his eyes drift toward the window. Outside, the rain had picked up just enough to distort the view, softening the edges of the neighborhood. Everything looked damp, muted, peaceful. The kind of evening that asked nothing of you but stillness. For the next several minutes, Jake fell into a lull. He responded to a couple of emails, skimmed through the latest updates from his development team, then let his mind drift. He wasn't in the mood to focus. His thoughts wandered lazily, the same way the light in the room shifted with the dimming sky. At some point, his phone buzzed once on the table, short, sharp, insignificant. A notification from the camera app. He barely noticed it at first, assuming it was nothing. Another delivery truck or a neighbor's pet triggering the motion sensor. But out of idle habit, he tapped the screen, unlocking it with his thumb, and opened the app. The thumbnail on the newest clip caught his attention, not immediately, not in any jarring way, but enough to slow his scrolling. It was dark, taken just moments ago, time-stamped 7:18 p.m. He remembered glancing at the clock when Kate had left. It had been right around 7:08. This clip was no more than 10 minutes later. He tapped it. At first, the screen was black as the camera adjusted to the low light. A second passed. Then, a figure emerged from the shadows near the edge of the frame. The front porch light hadn't turned on, it was set to motion, but this person was moving slowly, deliberately, like someone familiar with the sensor's timing. They stepped closer, just enough for the camera to pick up their outline. Tall. Wearing a hoodie with the hood pulled up, obscuring their face. Something in the way they moved felt off, too confident, too smooth. Jake narrowed his eyes and watched closely. The figure reached out and gripped the handle of the front door. There was no hesitation, no knocking, no fumbling with a phone or searching for a key. The door opened easily, and the person stepped inside. The camera caught a partial glimpse of their profile as they entered. Sharp jawline, narrow face, the corner of a smirk visible before they disappeared beyond the doorframe. Jake's heart gave a single sharp thud. He didn't move, he just sat there, frozen, phone gripped in one hand, staring at the playback. The motion clip ended and the screen returned to the list of recent recordings. He tapped the clip again and watched it from the beginning. This time he turned the brightness up. He stared harder at the face, the posture, the shape of the shoulders. It was too familiar, too damn familiar. But it wasn't possible. Not him. Not here. He leaned back slowly, trying to suppress the rising tension crawling up the back of his neck. His mind scrambled for alternatives. Maybe a delivery guy using the wrong entrance. Maybe a friend of Kate's picking something up. Maybe he was wrong, but no, he knew that body language. He knew that face, even in shadow. The realization struck harder the second time through. The man who had just entered their home wasn't supposed to be anywhere near it. He wasn't part of their lives anymore. Not for over a year. Jake had heard about him enough in the early months of their relationship. Kate's ex, the one who wouldn't let go. There had been calls, messages, and then one dramatic confrontation that ended with her changing her number and blocking him everywhere. She had cried, shaken in his arms, and promised she wanted a clean break from the past. He had believed her. He had wanted to believe her. And for a long time, it seemed like he'd been right to. Jake's thumb hovered over the rewind button. He tapped it again. The figure moved the same way, purposefully, naturally. There was no nervousness, no fumbling, no uncertainty. Whoever it was didn't knock. They didn't text. They didn't hesitate. They had a key, or they knew exactly how to get in. That fact alone unsettled him more than anything. He switched to the app's log of system activity. No alerts for tampering, no break-in, no forced entry. It simply read, "Door opened 1918," which meant the lock had turned normally, which meant whoever had come in had either been let in or already had access. The thought made his stomach twist. He sat motionless, staring at the now static image on his phone. The weight of that 10-minute gap between Kate's departure and the man's arrival now pressed down on him like something solid, undeniable. It was too precise, too coordinated to be a coincidence. He stood up slowly, walked to the hallway, and stared at the console table. The key bowl sat undisturbed. His keys were there. Her spare set, too. Everything appeared untouched, but the illusion was breaking. A quiet dread crept in as he began scanning the house with a different kind of gaze, no longer seeing furniture or decor, but entry points, blind spots, places someone might have gone. Or still be. He checked the back door. Locked. He peeked into the guest room. Empty. The garage. Still. He moved quietly, cautiously, as though afraid to disturb something he hadn't yet found. His phone buzzed again. Another motion alert. This time, it came from the hallway camera inside the house. He tapped the screen. The app loaded slower than he liked. His heart was thudding now, a steady low pulse that echoed in his ears. The hallway feed flickered to life. A figure moved past the frame, partially obscured, heading toward the kitchen. The same hoodie, the same posture. The man had walked straight into their home 10 minutes after Kate had left, and now he was moving through it like it belonged to him. Jake's breath caught in his throat. The footage played back in eerie silence, broken only by the faint sound of the rain against the windows. The camera timestamp confirmed what he already knew: this was happening in real time, or close enough to it. The man hadn't just visited. He had entered, unannounced, uninvited, and Kate hadn't said a word. The question shifted from who to why, and more importantly, how long had this been going on? Jake stood rooted to the floor, the walls around him suddenly unfamiliar. The house, once safe and still, now pulsed with uncertainty. Every shadow looked darker. Every silence felt loaded. He had trusted her. He had trusted everything. But the camera, impartial and unblinking, had shown him a truth he wasn't ready to see. Something had broken, and it wasn't the door. It was something deeper, quieter, and infinitely harder to repair. Jake stood in the middle of the living room, the glow of the phone screen still casting a pale light across his face. His fingers trembled slightly as he scrolled back through the clip, pausing, rewinding, playing again. over and over. Each time, the same moment gripped him tighter, the subtle lift of the figure's chin as they approached the door, the way the shoulders hunched just slightly against the chill, the confident reach for the handle. It wasn't a stranger. That was what unsettled him most. This wasn't someone randomly testing doors or casing the neighborhood. This was someone familiar, someone who knew exactly what they were doing, someone who had been here before. The third time he paused the video. The porch light had caught just enough of the figure's face for Jake to see the curve of a cheekbone, the outline of a jaw, and a brief flicker of expression as the door opened. It was only a moment, but it was enough. Enough for recognition. To bloom with dreadful certainty. He knew this man. Not personally, not well, but well enough to place him. His name was Tom. Jake had never met Tom in person, but he had seen old photos once on Kate's phone in the early days of their relationship when everything was still new and unfiltered. A beach trip, blurry nightclub selfies, screenshots of text saved in a folder she thought she had deleted. Back then, Kate had told him everything, or at least what felt like everything. Tom had been a part of her life for almost 3 years. It hadn't ended cleanly. The details were vague, more emotional than factual, but Jake had accepted her version of the past. There had been drama, heartbreak, promises broken. She told him Tom had trouble letting go, that there had been calls, texts, unannounced appearances. Eventually, she had cut him off, blocked his number, deleted his socials. Jake remembered holding her hand the night she cried after Tom had left a note on her windshield. He remembered believing that was the end of it. But now, a year later, Tom was here inside their home, 10 minutes after Kate had left for a supposed tea night with Jenny. The realization sank into Jake like ice water, creeping through his limbs and settling in his spine. He felt himself detach, his mind operating on a different plane, cataloging the facts as if they belonged to someone else. Tom had entered without resistance. He knew where to walk, what to do. He hadn't searched for anything. He hadn't hesitated. He had moved through the house like it belonged to him. Jake sat down slowly, the couch beneath him suddenly foreign. The air felt thick, like the walls themselves had leaned in to hear the truth he was trying to deny. It wasn't just about Tom. Being there, it was about what his presence meant. It meant that the past Kate had claimed to leave behind had never truly stayed gone. It meant that someone who wasn't supposed to know anything about their current life still had access. And worst of all, it meant that Kate had likely let it happen. He opened the security app again and pulled up the internal feed. The hallway. Camera had recorded 2 more clips after the initial entry. Jake tapped the first one. The timestamp read 7:19 p.m. Tom appeared in the frame walking past the stairs. His head turned slightly, and for a moment he looked directly at the camera. Not with surprise or confusion, but with something else, something closer to indifference. Jake froze the image. Their eyes hadn't met, obviously, but it felt like they had. Tom's gaze, frozen mid-step, was calm and unhurried. A man who was not afraid of being seen. The second clip showed him in the kitchen, opening the fridge, retrieving a bottle of water, and leaning against the counter as if waiting. His phone was in his hand. He scrolled, then pocketed it. At one point, he turned and looked toward the hallway, lips moving, possibly speaking to someone out of frame. Or perhaps to himself. Then he walked out of view. Jake checked the time again. Kate had been gone for less than 30 minutes. If Tom had entered at 7:18 and it was now barely past 7:40, it meant there was still time. Time for something to happen. Time for someone to come back. He stood up quickly, indecision clawing at him. Should he leave? Should he stay hidden? Should he call someone? The house was suddenly too quiet. Every creak of the floor, every subtle groan of the settling. Walls made him tense. He peered down the hallway toward the kitchen, but it was empty now. The house no longer felt like his. It felt borrowed. Infiltrated. He walked to the front door and checked the lock. Still engaged. No signs of forced entry, nothing out of place. Everything appeared normal, so painfully normal that it made his stomach churn. The console table still held its decorative bowl of keys, its carefully stacked magazines, the candle Kate lit every evening. Even the faint scent of her perfume still lingered in the air. But now all of it felt curated, like a stage set waiting for a scene to play out. Jake returned to the living room and pulled up the still image of Tom looking into the camera. He stared at it for a long time, trying to read the expression, to decode the motive. Was this a random visit? A confrontation? A moment of weakness on Kate's part? Or was this something else entirely, something planned, rehearsed, repeated? The questions came faster than he could answer them. How long had it been going on? Was Kate meeting him? Was she coming back soon? Did she know the cameras were still active? The thought struck him like a slap. She didn't know. She had assumed they were just for show. He had stopped mentioning them after the first few weeks when nothing had happened. She'd probably forgotten about the app altogether. That ignorance had protected him now, had given him eyes where there should have been none. But it also meant the betrayal was deeper than he feared. He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the evidence was stacking itself brick by brick into a wall he couldn't look around. Tom's presence wasn't random. It wasn't a misunderstanding. And Kate hadn't warned him, hadn't called, hadn't said a word. As the rain continued to fall outside, a slow, steady rhythm against the window pane, Jake sat in the center of his once safe home and tried to breathe through the new reality unfolding around him. The man he had only known as a shadow in old stories was no longer a ghost. He was here, flesh and blood, walking the same floors, breathing the same air, occupying the same space. And the person who had promised he was gone had left the door open behind her. Jake sat in the near dark, the glow of his laptop screen illuminating his face as he clicked through the internal camera feeds with methodical precision. The light from the hallway filtered faintly into the living room, and the house had grown still again, eerily so. There was no movement, no sound beyond the ambient hum of the refrigerator and the occasional patter of rain against the window panes. He knew that whatever remained of the night's quiet had already been shattered. Now it was just a matter of witnessing what had already happened, what the walls had recorded in silence while he sat unaware just a room away. He accessed the hallway feed first, time-stamped just moments after Tom entered. The camera, mounted discreetly above the coat rack near the stairs, captured a clear view of the main corridor, the same corridor Jake had walked through 100 times a week, usually without thinking. In the footage, Tom appeared suddenly from the edge of the frame, stepping in confidently. He didn't pause, didn't scan the space like someone unfamiliar with their surroundings. He knew the layout. His movements had a strange, unsettling familiarity, turning slightly toward the kitchen as if pulled by memory or habit. Jake zoomed in slightly, studying Tom's face. It was partially shadowed, but the composure was evident. He looked at ease, disturbingly so. Not like someone intruding, but like someone returning. There was a strange contradiction in the image, a man clearly where he wasn't supposed to be, and yet he didn't look like he felt out of place. That alone told Jake more than he wanted to know. Tom reached up, briefly adjusting the hood of his sweatshirt. He passed the camera with a sideways glance, not startled or even curious, just mildly acknowledging its presence, like someone who recognized an old fixture in a familiar home. Then he walked out of frame toward the kitchen. Jake scrubbed forward in the timeline, pulling up the next clip, triggered less than a minute later. This time, the kitchen camera came alive. The camera in the kitchen was mounted discreetly near The light fixture above the sink angled to capture the entire counter and part of the dining nook beyond. The image sprang to life as Tom entered the frame, his back turned to the lens at first. He moved straight to the refrigerator, opened it, and reached for a bottle of water. He unscrewed the cap, took a sip, then leaned casually against the counter. Again, there was no hesitation, no sense of urgency. He wasn't looking around to see if anyone was home. He wasn't tiptoeing or listening for noise. He was relaxed, standing in the center of someone else's kitchen like it belonged to him. Jake's hands tightened around the edge of the laptop. The casualness of it stung deeper than any confrontation. He watched as Tom reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen a few times, stared at it for a while, then slid it back into his coat. Jake's mind reeled. Was he texting Kate? Waiting for her? Had this entire routine played out before? Unobserved, undetected? He fast-forwarded. At 7:24 p.m., Tom moved into the dining nook and sat down at the small table, the one where Jake and Kate usually had breakfast on weekends. He sat like he'd sat there before, one leg stretched out, one hand resting lazily on the table's surface. At one point, he reached toward the bowl of fruit and picked up an apple, twirling it in his hand. He didn't take a bite, just spun it slowly, lost in thought, maybe. Or maybe just biding time. Jake paused the footage. He felt as though he were watching a movie set in a house that looked like his, with actors who resembled people he'd once known. But the emotional weight in his chest was real. There was no script here, no performance. This was his life, his space, invaded and repurposed without consent. He scrubbed it backward again, looking for anything that would suggest. This was a mistake, a misunderstanding, a one-time breach. But there was nothing, no calls, no messages left on the counter, no signs of urgency. Just a man making himself comfortable in a life he no longer belonged to. Another clip loaded. Tom had moved back toward the living room now. This angle was more limited. The camera captured only the threshold, but it was enough to see him set something down near the front closet. Jake squinted. It looked like a small package, maybe a book or envelope wrapped in brown paper. Tom placed it gently, almost ceremonially, then stood there for a moment. He looked down the hallway toward the back of the house. For one moment, his expression changed, eyes narrowing slightly, lips pressed into a thin line, something hard and unreadable flashing across his face. It passed quickly, replaced once again by that cool, unfazed exterior. Then, with the same calm confidence, Tom turned and walked back through the kitchen, retracing his steps. The door camera picked him up again at 7:31 p.m. This time the exit was just as smooth as the entrance. No glancing back, no hurry. He stepped out into the rain, pulled up his hood again, and disappeared into the night. Jake sat there long after the footage ended, staring at the blank screen. His thoughts churned in loops, spirals, chasing themselves into corners. The logic was all there, the evidence undeniable. What gnawed at him now was the emotional calculus. How long had this been going on? Was this the first time? The last? Did Kate know? Had she lied directly to his face, or worse, had she simply omitted everything, trusting he would never check, that he would remain blissfully unaware? He got up slowly and walked to the entryway. The package Tom had left was still there. Jake crouched, examined it. It was light, wrapped tightly. He didn't open it, not yet. There was something too intimate about the gesture, too calculated. A message left behind, proof of presence. Or maybe a token of something ongoing. He returned to the kitchen, leaning against the same counter where Tom had stood minutes earlier. The space felt foreign now. The smell of the candle, the hum of the appliances, the quiet, all of it had a different texture, as though the air itself had shifted, Jake opened the drawer by the sink. Inside, the emergency keys were still there, untouched, which meant Tom hadn't found a hidden copy. He had one already. Or someone had given it to him. He stood there, gripping the edge of the counter, heart pounding against his ribs, and let the question settle fully for the first time. Was Kate really with Jenny? Or was Jenny just the story she used every time the door opened for someone else? The silence that lingered in the house after Tom left was different. It wasn't the familiar quiet of a cozy evening or the muted calm of a rainy night. It was the silence that follows a revelation, the kind that feels like it has a shape, a temperature, a weight. Jake moved slowly through the house, not because he was afraid, but because something inside him had shifted, and now even the walls seemed foreign. The same floorboards beneath his feet, the same dim hallway light, the same framed photos by the staircase, yet none of it looked quite the same anymore. The trust that had quietly saturated this space had evaporated, and in its absence, everything felt stripped bare. The package Tom had left by the closet remained untouched. Jake couldn't bring himself to open it. It sat there like a challenge, a symbol of violation that didn't require investigation to confirm what had already been made clear. He had replayed the footage a dozen times, searching for a flaw in logic, a crack in the narrative, something that would suggest this wasn't what it appeared to be. But it was. It was exactly what it looked like. A man who didn't live here anymore had entered as if he still did. A man who had no place in Jake's world was walking through it with unshakable familiarity. Kate returned home just after 9 p.m., her coat damp with light rain, her cheeks flushed from the cold or maybe from conversation. She dropped her bag on the chair like she always did, shrugged off her coat, and called out to him with the casual tone of someone who didn't know she was walking into something irreversible. Jake didn't answer immediately. He was sitting at the dining table, the laptop in front of him, the screen still glowing with a paused frame from the security footage. When she came around the corner and saw the image Tom's profile in the hallway, her footsteps faltered. Her face changed in a way Jake would never forget. The color drained from her cheeks. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Her hand tightened around the strap of her purse, a small, involuntary movement. There were no raised voices, no confrontation, no demands. Jake simply looked at her, and that was enough. She sat down across from him without a word, her eyes on the screen, then on him. The silence between them held all the questions and all the answers. She didn't deny it. She didn't even explain. After a long pause, she whispered something, but the words didn't matter. The damage had already been done, and no version of the truth she could offer would change what he had seen. That night, she slept in the guest room. Jake didn't sleep at all. He lay awake staring at the ceiling, the rain tapping gently against the windows, a ghostly metronome counting the end of something that had once felt permanent. His mind was quiet in a way that felt unnatural, stripped of hope but also of confusion. Clarity had come, and with it, a strange, cold peace. The footage had shown what words never could. It had given shape to suspicion, to fear, to the faint threads of doubt he hadn't even known were growing. By morning, Kate had packed a suitcase. She didn't say where she was going, and he didn't ask. Her eyes were red, her shoulders slumped with defeat or shame or something heavier. She moved slowly, not out of hesitation, but because every step felt like an ending. As she closed the front door behind her, Jake sat on the edge of the bed, the dull sound of her departure echoing through the rooms. The house was his again, but not the same. It felt larger and emptier, like a space that had been purged of its illusion. In the following days, he walked through it quietly, picking up the pieces that had been left behind, not just physical objects, but the residue of trust, of memory, of a life he now had to reassemble. He opened the windows to let the air circulate, as though hoping to flush out the scent of betrayal, the stale weight of secrets. He considered deleting the footage, but didn't. He transferred it to a secure drive and locked it away. Not because he planned to revisit it, but because some truths, once seen, deserved to be preserved, if only as proof that he hadn't imagined them. The cameras stayed on, but he no longer checked them obsessively. Their purpose had changed. They weren't about protection anymore, they were a reminder. A quiet warning that even the people closest to you can carry other lives behind their eyes. Over time, the sharp edges of pain dulled, but they didn't disappear. He moved through his routines again: coffee in the morning, long walks through the neighborhood, evening calls with friends who didn't ask too many questions. He didn't tell anyone what had happened in detail. He didn't need to. The story was his, and in a strange way, it was private. Even though it had unfolded under the gaze of a camera lens, the package Tom left remained unopened for several weeks. Eventually, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, Jake sat down and peeled the fouls. Paperback. Inside was a worn paperback book and a handwritten note. The message was short. No apology. No explanation. Just 3 words. She called me. Jake folded the note, set it inside the book, and placed it in a drawer. He never read the book. Never needed to. He had already read the real story, one frame at a time, in the silence of his own home. Life moved forward in slow, careful steps. The house grew quieter, but it also grew more honest. Jake learned to enjoy the solitude not as emptiness, but as space reclaimed. The rooms that once felt haunted by questions now felt still with understanding. He rearranged the furniture, repainted the hallway, bought a new candle for the kitchen. It didn't smell like hers. It didn't need to. The house belonged to him again, not the version he had shared, but the one he now chose to keep. And with each passing day, the memory of the footage, of the silhouette, of the door opening and the past walking in uninvited, faded just a little more into the background. Not erased, but accepted, understood, and left where it belonged.